Today we are going to learn about covalent bonding. The question of the day is, what does the prefix co mean? What are some other words that begin with the same prefix? What do you think covalent bonding might entail? So we already know about ionic bonding. When a metal and a nonmetal bond together, the electrons are transferred from the metal to the nonmetal. However, there are times when two nonmetals bond. When this happens, we call it covalent bonding. So covalent bonding, co means together, valent as in valence electrons, and bonding as in joining together to make a new compound. In covalent bonding, two atoms share a valence electron when they bond together to form a new compound. So let's look at some examples. So for covalent bonding, you might think of water, H2O, or carbon dioxide, CO2. Both carbon and oxygen are nonmetals that are looking to gain electrons. There is no way for both carbon and oxygen to gain electrons at the same time while bonding together. So the two share the electrons that they have, kind of like a compromise. A covalent bond is a bond between two nonmetals where they share electrons. The valence electrons are the overlap between the two nonmetals. When ionic bonds form, you make an ionic compound that breaks apart in water. So it ionizes in water to make an aqueous solution. When you make a compound using covalent bonds, it's called a molecular compound. Covalent compounds are things like sugar. So, what are some properties of molecular compounds? Well, unlike the high melting points of ionic compounds due to their extremely rigid structure, the molecular compounds have less rigid structures and so have lower melting points. Molecular compounds are therefore more likely to be gases or liquids. They also do not easily dissolve in water or conduct electricity. Unlike ionic compounds, which create charges due to one atom gaining electrons and another losing, when you have a molecular compound, there's partial charges because basically the atoms are sharing, but no one said they have to share evenly. And this sharing based partial charges is based on something called electronegativity, or the ability to attract electrons. Do you remember when we talked about polyatomic ions? Well, most polyatomic ions have covalent bonds that hold them together. So when a metal bonds to the polyatomic, the compound contains both ionic and covalent bonds. For example, calcium hydroxide. Calcium bonds to the hydroxide ion using an ionic bond. However, the hydroxide ion is held together by a covalent bond where oxygen and hydrogen are sharing their electrons. Now, pause the video and try the show what you know questions. covalently bonded compound. In the case of H2O, we have hydrogen with a +1 oxidation state and oxygen with -2. Since they form oppositely charged ions, you may think they are able to make an ionic compound. But you must remember both H and O are nonmetals, so they form a covalent compound. Copper chloride, CuCl2, copper is a metal that makes a positive ion. Chlorine is a nonmetal, it makes a negative ion, so the bond is ionic.